These are the 7 most iconic moments in The Lord of the Rings. Scenes so famous they've defined pop culture for over 2 decades. But for all their cinematic glory, they are almost unrecognizable compared to the books. While purists often condemn the changes, many fans argue the films actually improved upon the source material. So today, we're diving headfirst into this massive debate and breaking down these 7 pivotal scenes to see what was lost, what was gained, and why they still resonate with us 25 years later. And we begin with the Battle of the Hornburg, a fight that is dramatically different but just as epic in the book. If there is one moment in the Two Towers that defines cinematic catharsis, it's the climax of the Battle of Helm's Deep. Let's be honest, we all know the sequence by heart. It's the dawn of the 5th day, Theoden and Aragorn ride out, fully believing they are going to die, only to look to the east and see Gandalf cresting the hill. And right beside him, the exiled Éomer and 2,000 riders of Rohan, who all charge down a ridiculously steep cliff and obliterate the Uruk-hai army. It is a monumental piece of filmmaking. But what if I told you that in the original text, Éomer was nowhere near that hill? That's right, the movie completely exiles Éomer to create a dramatic last-minute rescue, but in the books, Éomer was never banished by Grima Wormtongue. During the actual Battle of the Hornburg, he gets cut off from the main keep and is forced to retreat into the massive glittering caves. And he isn't alone, by the way. He and Gimli are both trapped together in the dark, fighting tooth and nail to protect the helpless refugees that are hidden inside. It's actually a great bonding moment between Éomer and Gimli, as they then spend a lot of the remainder of the trilogy together. So if Éomer was in the caves with Gimli, then who was on the hill with Gandalf? Enter Erkenbrand. In Tolkien's writings, Erkenbrand is the Lord of the Westfold, and he is the true savior of Helm's Deep, aside from Gandalf, that is. And get this, he doesn't arrive with a glorious cavalry charge. He arrives on foot with 1,000 exhausted men who just ran all the way across the plains to get there in time. No horses, they charge down the slope on foot. The emotional difference here is insane. Peter Jackson leverages a high-speed, visually stunning cavalry charge led by a banished nephew who remains loyal to the very man who banished him. It's perfect for movie pacing, but the book relies on grueling geographical logistics. Furthermore, Theoden doesn't ride out because Aragorn convinces him to seek death and glory out of despair. The book's Theoden decides to ride out purely as a massive act of defiance, completely unaware that Gandalf or Erkenbrand are even coming. He rides out because it's his duty as king, shifting the emotional weight from a miraculous rescue to an ultimate display of spiritual endurance. And because this video isn't just about Helm's Deep, I can't spend 20 minutes talking about Legolas and Gimli's incredible reunion after they got separated, or discuss the intricacies of Theoden's character arc in the book versus the movie. I already did all of that over on my series, Movies vs. Manuscripts, which, if you didn't know, is where I compared the books to the films and found every single change, revision, and omission, page by page and scene by scene. So for all of the scenes that we're going to discuss in today's video, I'm going to link the in-depth breakdowns of each of those scenes in the video description. So be sure to check those out if you're interested. But for the sake of this video, let's answer the question of who did it better. And I gotta be honest, I think in terms of emotional resonance, the movie nailed this one. Specifically because we don't know much about Erkenbrand. And although he is utilized effectively in the book, it is so much more impactful to have the return of Éomer mark the climax of this moment. Anyway, while Helm's Deep gave us one of the most monumental military victories in fantasy history, the very end of the trilogy gave us an absolute emotional wrecking ball. I am, of course, talking about Aragorn's coronation, and more specifically when Aragorn turns to the 4 hobbits and says, "My friends, you bow to no one." If you don't cry during that scene, you might actually be an orc. In Peter Jackson's films, this is a spontaneous, overwhelming emotional climax. The hobbits, feeling small and out of place among the towering lords of Gondor, begin to kneel. Aragorn stops them and delivers that iconic line, and the entire courtyard, a literal sea of armored soldiers and nobles, drops to their knees for 4 exhausted halflings. It is visually and emotionally perfect. But in Tolkien's original text, this overwhelming tribute doesn't happen at the coronation of Minas Tirith at all. In fact, it happens much earlier, and the emotional weight is completely shifted from a spontaneous cinematic reaction to an immediate monumental celebration. In the books, Frodo and Sam wake up after Mount Doom in the fields of Cormallen. And when they walk out to meet the host of the West, Aragorn doesn't just stop them from bowing, he actively kneels to them first. But it gets even crazier. Aragorn and his entire army throw a massive feast in their honor, and a minstrel actually steps forward to sing an epic ballad about Frodo of the Nine Fingers and the Ring of Doom. This entire sequence takes up an entire chapter near the end of The Return of the King. The philosophical difference here is massive. The movie saves this emotional release for the very end of the journey, tying it to Aragorn's ascension as king, but Tolkien's version is a profound, immediate outpouring of gratitude from the surviving soldiers. Aragorn hasn't even been crowned yet, but his very first act of ultimate leadership after the war is to honor the incredible spiritual endurance of 2 hobbits. It elevates the entire army of men, showing their humility before the true saviors of Middle-earth. So why did this work for the movie and become such an iconic, climactic moment for the trilogy? Well, because, simply put, they just didn't have time for the fields of Cormallen. While Tolkien's version of the post-war activities are undoubtedly more detailed and better written, it would have taken another 2 hours to show everything that happened. So personally, I think that this single sentence from Aragorn was the perfect way to sum up the feeling that Tolkien conveyed in his final chapters. Now, while the Hobbits' triumph at Cormallen was defined by grace and victory, the journey to get there was paved by tragedy, and no loss hit the Fellowship harder than the last stand of the Captain of Gondor. In the books, Boromir's death actually occurs in the very first chapter of the Two Towers book, but Peter Jackson and his team decided to move it to the end of the Fellowship of the Ring movie, and it's easy to see why. It is the ultimate climax for the first stage of the Fellowship's journey. Boromir blows the Horn of Gondor, taking down dozens of Uruk-hai to protect Merry and Pippin, before facing off against Lurtz, the terrifying Uruk leader. After Boromir is pierced by 3 massive arrows, Aragorn leaps into the fray, engages in a brutal, gritty duel with Lurtz, and chops off his head. Then Aragorn kneels by Boromir's side to hear those famous final words, "I would have followed you, my brother, my captain, my king." It is a perfect, tear-jerking cinematic send-off. But if you've read Tolkien's original text, then you know that that epic boss fight never happened. And Boromir's final words weren't nearly as eloquent. In the books, Lurtz does not exist. He was an original creation for the films to give the audience a localized, tangible villain for the final moments of the first movie. Furthermore, Aragorn completely misses the battle. He's up on the high seat of Amon Hen, and by the time he hears the Horn of Gondor and sprints through the woods to help, the battle's already over. The orcs are gone, and Merry and Pippin have been taken. Aragorn simply finds Boromir resting against a tree, pierced by many arrows. And there's a profound difference between these two versions. Peter Jackson needed a physical antagonist to give the first movie a satisfying climax and to allow Aragorn to actively avenge his fallen brother, which simultaneously reinforced our perception of Aragorn as the leader of the group and the ultimate fighting machine. But Tolkien's version isn't about an action hero revenge plot, it's a quiet, intensely tragic confession. Boromir uses his dying breath to admit that he tried to steal the ring from Frodo, a devastating failure of his own spirit. His redemption comes entirely from his honesty and his desperate plea for Aragorn to go to Minas Tirith and save their people. But Boromir never acknowledges Aragorn as his brother, captain, or king. As for Aragorn, he is greatly grieved, and that is rooted in the fact that he arrived too late, not in a triumphant, blood-soaked duel. Once again, I have to take into account the difference between movie emotions and book emotions. In a book, you have a much longer timeline to get the reader invested in the story and to tug on their heartstrings. But movies rely on poignant moments pinned throughout the plot, and this is one that I think was necessary for the end of the first movie. To end the first film in the same way the first book ends, which is to say on a cliffhanger, would have been a mistake. Instead, the next film's plot is set. We know Frodo and Sam have left, Boromir has died, and the three companions must go after Merry and Pippin. Still plenty of plot and unknown to chew on, but just enough climactic resolution to satisfy the audience's emotion. That being said, Boromir's sacrifice was just foreshadowing for the massive battles that would define the rest of the war. And when it comes to jaw-dropping cinematic charges, there is one battle cry that stands above the rest, even if the movie gave the iconic lines to the wrong person. The Ride of the Rohirrim is epic, plain and simple. As the forces of Mordor work their way through Minas Tirith, the horns of Rohan echo across the plain. King Theoden lines up his cavalry and delivers one of the most spine-tingling speeches in cinematic history, ending with that ferocious, echoing scream of death, which is then picked up and chanted by the entire army. It's pure, uncut adrenaline, and the music is just so good. A year or two ago, I went to one of those live orchestra concerts where they played the music along with the movie, and there were about 5,000 people in the audience. And during that scene, everyone chanted death along with the Rohirrim. I still get goosebumps just thinking about it. Anyway, despite how incredible that moment is, did you know that Theoden never chants death during that initial charge? In Tolkien's text, Theoden's pre-battle speech is still incredibly powerful, and his banner bearer blows the horn of Rohan so hard that it literally shatters, and then the Rohirrim charge like a cleansing wind. But that iconic, bone-chilling chant of death, that actually belongs to Eomer, and it happens much later in the battle, after a completely devastating turn of events. In the book, after Theoden is crushed by his horse and dies on the battlefield, Eomer sees Eowyn lying motionless and seemingly dead. He takes up command from his uncle as the new king of Rohan, and it's in this moment of utter despair and grief that Eomer, believing all is lost and that he is going to die alongside his fallen family, raises his sword and screams death. The surviving Rohirrim, sharing his fury, take up the chant and charge to their death. Remember, there's no reinforcements at this time, as Aragorn hasn't arrived yet with the ships, and they all think Aragorn is dead. So as the Haradrim begin to aid the orcs, the army of Rohan dwindles, and Eomer's death chant is literally because he thinks they're all going to die. Therefore, the emotional difference here is pretty massive. Jackson expertly took Eomer's cry of despair and transplanted it into Theoden's speech to maximize the pre-charge hype. It turns a moment of agonizing grief into a unified roar of courage and duty, but in doing so, he removed the profound darkness of Eomer's arc. This is one of the scenes where I can totally see why it worked on film, as obviously it gave us one of the greatest moments of the entire trilogy. But on the other hand, it left open an unknown alternate timeline. I often think, what would it have been like to have a movie-accurate Battle of the Pelennor Fields? I think it could have been pretty epic. But let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And hey, while you're at it, why not subscribe? It helps out the channel and keeps you up to date whenever I release new Lord of the Rings content. Now, while Eomer was leading that furious charge, the greatest threat on the battlefield was being faced by a much smaller, unlikely hero. The showdown between Eowyn and the Witch King is easily one of the most triumphant moments in the entire trilogy. In the film, after the Witch King's fell beast is killed, he engages in a terrifying physical brawl with Eowyn. He shatters her shield, bringing her to her knees, and boasts that no man can kill him. Then Merry steps up, stabs the Nazgul in the back of the leg, and this gives Eowyn the opening to pull off her helmet and deliver that iconic "I am no man" line. It's a brilliant, cheer-inducing moment of defiance. But if we look back at it in the books, we realize that this victory wasn't just a clever loophole in a prophecy, it was a deeply ancient magical weapon. In Tolkien's writings, the confrontation is much shorter and carries a heavy supernatural weight. Merry doesn't just stab the Witch King with a standard sword to distract him, he uses a barrow blade, which is an ancient magical dagger which was forged thousands of years earlier by the men of Westeros specifically to fight the Witch King himself. Remember, the Witch King of Angmar has been around for a very long time, so people who faced him thousands of years prior made this weapon specifically for him. It's a very long story of how Merry gets this, which is why you should check out some of the videos in the description, because I explain it further in my Movies vs. Manuscripts episodes. But anyway, the magical mechanics here are crucial. Merry's stab wasn't just a physical wound. The ancient magic of the barrow blade actually broke the spell that bound the Witch King's unseen flesh to his will. It essentially made the immortal Nazgul vulnerable, allowing Eowyn's physical strike to actually kill him. which then would mean that when the prophecy says no man can kill him, it doesn't mean a woman. It was referring to Merry, a hobbit. The cinematic choice to omit the deep lore of the barrow blade makes complete sense. Peter Jackson wanted to elevate Eowyn's raw courage and Merry's bravery without bogging down the climax with exposition of thousands of years of magical smithing. It makes the victory feel deeply personal and physical, but in doing so, it removes the beautiful, interconnected poetry of Tolkien's history. In the book, the Witch King isn't just defeated by a shield maiden, he is defeated by the lingering ancestral power of the very people he had destroyed centuries ago, carried into battle by a hobbit. Do I prefer the movie version of this over the book version? For what it is, yeah. Again, I fall back on timing, and any diehard Tolkien fan needs to recognize the constraints of the films. If there is no Tom Bombadil, there are no barrow blades. It's a domino effect, and if they would have included the lore of the blade, they would have had to add about an hour of extra time to the Fellowship of the Ring, and then hope people remembered that small detail from the first film for the blade in the last one. So yes, the movie made the right call here, while still maintaining the climactic resolution of Eowyn and Merry's stand. But anyway, while Eowyn's victory on the Pelennor Fields relied on an ancient magical weapon, another confrontation earlier in the story relied on an entirely different kind of ancient power. That power was a Balrog of Morgoth, and it set the stage for the Fellowship's desperate escape from the mines of Moria, culminating in Gandalf's standoff on the bridge of Khazad-dûm. In the film, this sequence is a masterclass in cinematic pacing. The Fellowship battles a horde of orcs in the Chamber of Mazarbul, and right as things get quiet, they hear a low rumbling. A fiery glow appears, the orcs scatter in fear, and the Balrog makes its grand entrance. From there, it's a terrifying, linear sprint through the falling stairs and ending at the bridge. Gandalf breaks the span, sending the demon plummeting, but the fiery whip cracks up and catches his ankle. He hangs onto the ledge, shares a long, agonizing look with Frodo, tells them "Fly, you fools," and then actively chooses to let go, sacrificing himself so the others can escape. It's a tragic but deeply heroic climax. But if we look at the original text, this encounter wasn't a linear sprint, and the initial confrontation happens long before they ever reach the bridge. In the books, the Fellowship's first encounter with the Balrog actually happens all the way back in the Chamber of Mazarbul. As the orcs begin their assault, Gandalf stays behind to hold the door. This is another one of those times where the book version is a lot more complicated and I can't get into all of the tiny details. So if I leave some things out, it's not because I'm forgetting, it's just because I don't have time to dive into it. So again, check out the videos in the description. But basically, the Fellowship leave the Chamber of Mazarbul through a side exit, not like the movie where they go out the front. After going through the side exit, Gandalf seals the door behind them with magic, but he feels a dark presence on the other side, a conflicting magical force that is breaking down his own spell. These two opposing magical forces are so immense that the wooden door literally explodes and the room ceiling collapses. Gandalf is then thrown violently backward down the stairs, exhausted and physically battered. And it must be said here that Gandalf doesn't know what this evil spirit is. He has guesses, but he has no confirmation that it is a Balrog, unlike the movie where he's pretty clear early on that he knows what it is. Funnily enough, it is actually Legolas who first identifies the creature as a Balrog later at the bridge. Anyway, after escaping the chamber and buying some time through the door explosion, the Fellowship is then hunted for a considerable distance through the dark. By the time they finally reach the bridge of Khazad-dûm, it isn't the beginning of the fight, it's the desperate end of a long, exhausting retreat. And when Gandalf finally shatters the bridge, the sequence is insanely fast and violently abrupt. As the Balrog falls, it blindly lashes out with its whip. The whip wraps around Gandalf's knees, and he is immediately dragged into the abyss. He doesn't hang on to the edge, he doesn't have time to share a poignant look with Frodo or make a final conscious choice to fall. He simply cries, "Fly, you fools," as he is actively plunging into the darkness. The choice for the movie here is all about pacing and agency. Jackson consolidated the encounter into one grand reveal to maximize the visual spectacle, and then he had Gandalf hold onto the ledge to give the audience time to process the emotional weight of his sacrifice. By choosing to let go, Gandalf retains his heroic agency, but Tolkien's version highlights a much more terrifying reality. It's a grueling battle of magical attrition, followed by a shocking, violent snatching. It emphasizes the sheer, terrifying unpredictability of facing a primordial horror. The Fellowship is left completely traumatized because their invincible guide didn't just sacrifice himself, he was ripped away from them in the blink of an eye. But once again, I've got to give credit to the movie. I believe it perfectly encapsulates the same feeling of Tolkien's many pages into a cohesive sequence with a massive reveal. Instead of being chased for hours through tunnels, we get their escape in a few minutes, without any of the emotional weight being sacrificed. And while I could talk about this scene for hours, I think it's time that we wrap this list up with maybe the most beloved scene of the entire trilogy. That's right, we are finishing this epic list on the ash-covered slopes of Mount Doom. When Frodo collapses from pure exhaustion, completely unable to take another step toward the fire, Samwise Gamgee delivers what is arguably the most famous line in fantasy history. "I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you." In Peter Jackson's film, Sam heaves Frodo onto his shoulders, grunting and straining with every single agonizing step up the mountain. And while there's a bit more dialogue between the two hobbits on screen compared to the internal monologue found in the books, the core of the scene remains shockingly similar to Tolkien's original text. In fact, the mechanics of this iconic carry are almost identical to the book. Sam makes the exact same heroic decision. He physically lifts Frodo off the ground, bracing himself, fully expecting to be crushed by the dreadful, dragging weight of the ring. Instead, he finds that Frodo is surprisingly light. Tolkien specifically notes that he's no heavier than a hobbit child. And all of this brings me to the most important takeaway for this video. The profound difference here isn't a massive deviation from the source material, it's actually Peter Jackson recognizing exactly when not to change a single thing. While Jackson altered battles to improve pacing, created physical antagonists for climaxes, and shifted emotional payoffs to maximize cinematic impact, he knew that the deeply emotional bond between Sam and Frodo was already perfectly crafted. As a reader or a viewer, watching Sam refuse to let his best friend fail is the ultimate payoff of the entire journey. Sam doesn't have magical powers, ancient heritage, or an elven ring. His superpower is just pure, unconditional love for Frodo. Jackson chose to lift the exact words and themes directly from Tolkien's writing because they capture the absolute pinnacle of loyalty. This is the heart-wrenching moment we realize that while Frodo is the only one who can carry the ring, Sam is the only reason our hero is still breathing. It was an unforgettable movie moment born straight from the pages. And that wraps up our look at the incredible differences between the books and films for these 7 iconic scenes. As I've said throughout this video, I could talk about these details all day, but I want to hear from you. Out of all of the scenes we covered today, which version do you prefer? And which scene is your favorite? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Plus, like I said earlier, check out the video description for the exact episodes in my Movies vs. Manuscript series, where I cover each scene in way more detail. As always, I want to give a massive shout out to Jason, Joshua, Timothy, RoboSteve, Drix, Andy, Maha, and the rest of my incredible Patreon and YouTube members who help make these videos possible every month. Have a great week, and I'll see you in the next video.